Elishnish and Ludmilla continued their flight over the Empire, and only the occasional word passed between them as they focused on observing the lands below. Ludmilla's gaze often went to the east as she considered and reconsidered the Frost Dragon's observations of her conduct. You wish to lay a foundation based on truth, assured in the rightness of what you build upon it. It was exactly what she wished for, so Ludmilla couldn't say that Elishnish did not understand her intent. The Frost Dragon's pointed argument also merited serious consideration. While she could measure the alignment of others with His Majesty's will, she could not do so for herself. Furthermore, when Ludmilla used the skill on Elishnish, she did not appear to be any more out of alignment than Lady Shaltir. With that being the case, it made her question whether she was doing the right thing. Born and raised as a scion of a frontier house, Ludmilla understood that her views were not the views of a human but lived in the comfort of a developed and mostly secure interior. She grew up in a place where danger was ever present and demi-humans could be found less than a day away. It was not a situation where one could deliberate over crucial decisions in comfort. As Elishnish noted, everything was either for or against. The stabbing part, however, went both ways. Perhaps the greatest change to her life that came with the Sorceress Kingdom was the increased sense of leeway in everything. The idea that threats to their existence loomed just out of sight was gradually dissipating from the perception of the citizens. People no longer needed to worry about starvation. Discretionary income, a thing nearly unheard of in the past, was now in the hands of every tenant. In a single season, a farming household netted more than House Ziradnik had for the last decade. Foreign threats were even less of a concern. Armies that would normally ruin entire nations could be one-sidedly swept away by a single frontier noble and a small contingent of Death Series servitors. No longer did the feeling that everything was balanced on a razor's edge, that the slightest error in judgment could cost her people everything, weigh on her shoulders. As such, her approach to foreign threats, and even what she should consider foreign threats, was due for revision. Allowing things to remain as they were would result in her being unqualified for her title and station. Though she was often lauded for the progress she had made as a noble of the Sorceress Kingdom, it seemed that she still had a long way to go. It was past midnight when Ludmilla and Elishnish flew over the Empire's northern shores. The Imperial Highway followed the winding coastline as it connected the port cities, towns and villages that drew their livelihoods from the waves. She had thought that the inland sea southeast of the Katza Plains was quite impressive, but the Northern Ocean was something she never could have imagined. How the great mariners of song did not get lost in the vast expanse of trackless water was a mystery. "Do you know what is on the other side of this ocean?" Ludmilla asked. "Up until about 3,000 kilometers north of here," Elishnish answered, "it looks much the same on the surface. After that, you'll start seeing icebergs, think of them as floating islands of ice, that have broken off of the frozen expanse and drifted south with the current. You've been there? My mother told me about it once, so I went to take a look. I only got about halfway to the frozen expanse until I was chased off by one of the local frost dragons. She wasn't friendly at all, so I suspect that all sorts of unfriendly people live up there. I stopped to speak to a few of the people from the aquatic nations along the way. They're much friendlier, or maybe they were just trying to avoid being eaten." Given how Elishnish was when they first met, Ludmilla suspected that it was the latter. How many of these aquatic nations are there? Do they have any connections with the Empire? Considering that there is supposedly more ocean than land, I would say that there are more aquatic nations than terrestrial ones, at least surface ones. I have no idea what goes on in the realm below. The area that I flew over had a dozen or so aquatic kingdoms. From what I've heard, all nations in the Northern Ocean are under the dominion or at least the influence of an abyssal empire that lies under the frozen expanse. As for their relationship with the Baharuth Empire, I suppose that's a part of what I'm supposed to be investigating in these coming months. Roughly an hour after they crossed far to the north of our winter, Ludmilla felt Elishnish shudder beneath her. "Are you all right, Elishnish?" "She's here." Ludmilla turned her head, looking for potential threats around them. She then tried following Elishnish's gaze, but her head was pointed straight west at the Azalizia Mountains looming in the distance. "Who is that green dragon that I smelled when we first crossed into the Empire? She's down in that forest in the middle of those mountains." A ring of mountains, roughly 150 kilometers in diameter, dominated the landscape just ahead. Nestled within it was a large forest. Being that it was in the center of 5 major cities, the appearance of the forest was strange. There were no roads or any signs of management. It was simply a huge, primal blotch amidst the well-developed lands surrounding it. There is a fortification of some sort on the southeastern end, Ludmilla noted, but that will not stop a dragon from just flying out, would it? Of course not, Ilishnish replied. If I were to guess, it's there to stop the dragon's minions. What sort of minions would this dragon have? Whatever lives in that forest, Ilishnish told her. That should be what is going on, anyway. You sound fairly confident about all that. For someone who had barely explored the world outside of her mountain home and required direct experiences to properly comprehend new concepts and ideas, Ilishnish's authoritative tone felt out of place. It's a green dragon down there, after all. I do not understand what that means. It's natural for powerful dragons to gather minions around them, Ilishnish told her. Some dragons treat said minions as slaves, while others rule over them like subjects. Others fancy themselves as benevolent overlords who treat the beings in their territory as precious children under their care. Green dragons style themselves as masterminds whose machinations manipulate all within their domain. And this domain would be this ring of mountains? Every city you see around these mountains, most likely, Ilishnish said. It appears that the empire is not as monolithic as it seems. A furrow appeared over Ludmilla's brow at the frost dragon's statement. She had never heard anything about a quarter of the empire belonging to a dragon. I'm afraid I don't have any idea what's going on here. It's not complicated. This dragon probably exacts some form of tribute from the cities around it. They can either pay willingly or have it taken from them by force. That doesn't sound like a mastermind to me, just a tyrant. Yes, well, that's a green for you, Ilishnish said. A paper-thin veneer of civility masking a malignant covetousness only surpassed by reds. The sorceress kingdom is lucky that we frost dragons are simple and honest folk. It felt more that Ilishnish and her family were lucky to be frost dragons. They wouldn't have survived Lady Shiltir with the behavior she attributed to forest and fire dragons. I don't suppose the Empire gets anything out of this arrangement. Continued existence, Ilishnish seemed to shrug under Ludmilla's legs. I suppose they are bestowed a sort of protection, as well. Other dragons would have no qualms pillaging these cities if she wasn't here. Also, considering the age of the Baharuth Empire, the dragon was probably here first. It is these humans who have settled in her domain. So your father would have attacked these cities nearest to the Azalisia Mountains if it wasn't a part of this forest dragon's domain. If my father and his consorts did not have frost giants to contend with. I suppose if the frost giants were never there, the entire area around the Azalisia Mountains would have probably become tributaries to the frost dragons. Not many nations can simply shrug off dozens of frost dragons like the Sorceress Kingdom can. As it stood, however, we couldn't leave our territory unattended for long. Rather than banking north to follow the highway, Ilishnish cut directly over the ring of mountains. Ludmilla eyed the forest far below. Is this safe? She asked. If this forest dragon is as powerful as you suggest. I doubt she even knows that we're here, Ilishnish told her. I am the best hunter out of the frost dragons who are, in turn, the best hunters of dragonkind. Well, at least the frost dragons around here. I'm sure there are a few dragon lords of my kind in the world that can best me when it comes to stealth. Say that she has some way to detect you. Even if she does, it's like I said earlier, we dragons don't stop for every little thing. Additionally, following this highway is more dangerous than directly crossing over her domain should she decide to pursue. How so? Ludmilla asked. People usually go around threats. Ilishnish snorted. That is how earthbound beings think, she said. In reality, flying high and fast along the shortest route is the best way to avoid interception. Going around means we'd be giving her time to gain altitude and intercept us at a point further to the west. I am a frost dragon, and she will assume that I'm going back to the Azalisia Mountains. Even if she somehow detects me flying over her territory, I highly doubt she will do anything. Pursuit would not only be impossible, but it would make her look a fool should she attempt to do so. I will remember that, Ludmilla nodded. Thank you for your explanation. After completing their crossing over the forest dragon's territory, Ilishnish resumed her course over the Imperial Highway, banking to follow it back south. Ludmilla eyed the cities below. I wonder if the Sorceress Kingdom knows about this forest dragon collecting tribute from these cities. Why would it matter? Because the Empire is our protectorate, Ludmilla told Ilishnish. If what you surmise is truly the case, relying on the protection of this dragon is no longer necessary. What about her being here first? She does not have to go anywhere, Ludmilla replied. But the tribute will have to stop. No dragon would accede to that without. I hope you're not thinking of going down there and picking a fight. It would be a lie if Ludmilla said she wasn't even a bit curious about their chances. This was, however, purely academic. There was a proper order that any such challenge would need to follow. The Empire's affairs are still mostly its own, Ludmilla said. They could request assistance from the Sorceress Kingdom in the case of this forest dragon. From what I've heard from Lady Wagner, Elishnish replied, the Empire would rather trust, well, a green dragon than the Sorceress Kingdom. Are forest dragons really that terrible? More than I can truly convey, Elishnish said. Greens are insidious. I highly recommend that you avoid engaging in conversation with one entirely. They are your antithesis. They thrive on an intricate tapestry of deception and manipulation, and they savor the power that they hold over those who are ensnared in their traps and schemes. This feels something like the bigotry that you claim humans display towards other races. Their course shifted slightly. Several moments passed before Elishnish spoke again. A dragon's nature is much stronger than that of a human or demi-human, she told her. We are as much the personification of primal forces as we are people in the way that you perceive them. This bigotry is not bigotry at all, it is about as reliable as assumptions made of the undead. You are not making a very good case, Ludmilla smirked, considering your present company. I am making multiple points at once, Elishnish said. Your perception of the undead is extraordinarily skewed. Enough that you would consider giving naturally manifested intelligent undead a chance to prove themselves. It is as if your human self has bled into your undead existence, and those favorable views for one's own kind are being extended to undead as well. I'm sure that anyone would declare your circumstances and thinking utterly strange if they were told of them, even the undead. You do the exact opposite to species that fall outside of your, let's just call it good graces, shall we? Perhaps she was right about that. She thought it a matter of courtesy when she spoke with Captain Iska and went to see the other elder liches of the Katsa Cabal. However, it was likely that events wouldn't have played out that way if she had been one of the living. In that case, Ludmilla said, what is the nature of a frost dragon, and how is it so different from that of a forest dragon? You should already know the answer to the first part. Most may describe us as feral, but it is more accurate to say that we are simple and free-spirited. And honest? And honest. Beneath her, Elishnish seemed to take a deep breath. Earlier, the frost dragon said, you asked me if I would lie if it suited my purposes. That's right. There are two types of lies, Elishnish told her. The first are the lies you tell, the sort of lie that you were asking about. Second are what you might call true lies, behavior that tarnishes the soul. I would employ the former, but never the latter. To avoid the latter, I will employ the former if necessary. The strange reasoning gave Ludmilla pause. Was she trying to say that lying was a part of her nature, or that she would lie if it meant being true to herself? What do you mean by tarnish the soul? It means what it means. I may seem out of character for what you might consider a frost dragon, but make no mistake, at the core of my being, I am as much of a frost dragon as the others. Perhaps more so. I will do everything within my power to remain true to my being. That just sounds like you are being willful, Ludmilla furrowed her brow. You can claim that you took any action for that reason. Doing anything because I can would be just as bad. Elishnish glanced back at her. This isn't some random and superficial whim I'm speaking of here. As one who now possesses a limitless lifespan, it would do you well to heed what I say. Souls can be tarnished. They can be twisted. Mortal souls are easily tarnished and twisted, but they are mortal and their souls will return to the world before long. As an immortal, you do not want this to happen to you. Perhaps, as one of the undead, you will be subject to some compulsion that helps you remain untarnished, but this is not guaranteed to be the case. What happens when the soul becomes tarnished? Elishnish's scales rippled in disgust, one of many expressions Ludmilla would not have picked up on if she hadn't had the frost dragon's human-like appearances to use as a reference against her true one. You change, Elishnish told her. Perhaps you might even welcome it for a while, and perhaps others will express their approval over that change. But the dissonance will grow within your soul and eventually it will warp. That does not seem as bad as you make it sound. It may be as you say, for some, Elishnish admitted, but it will be terrible for you. You simply don't understand this because you have not yet truly realized what you are. There is a purpose to your existence, and you were chosen because you are ideal for that purpose. If you no longer serve that purpose, the world will no longer suffer your existence. You are extraordinarily fortunate that I am around to watch out for you. Ludmilla clenched her fists over her lap. Why did it always feel that there was more going on in her life than she knew, and others knew more about what was going on than she did? If she weren't on the receiving end of everything, she would have dismissed what they said as cryptic nonsense. Then, would you lie to me, Elishnish? No. Was that a lie? A long silence stretched on between them. No. Ludmilla frowned as Elishnish's voice sounded in her head. No, it wasn't Elishnish's voice, it was Elishnish herself. What was that? Telepathy, of course. I wasn't aware that you were capable of telepathy. Sardonic mirth seemed to fill her mind. Elishnish's presence was cool, yet warm at the same time. In a limited sense, I am. As are you. This telepathy is a sign of our bond, the one between a ranger and her companion. Ha, I really went and did it with her. Elishnish's weary sigh filled the air, drifting down the long corridor of Rantal's frost dragon aviary. She, a dragon, had willingly submitted to a being far weaker than herself. There was no great battle, no contest of wills, only the slow sense that she was being drawn in closer and closer to the undead noblewoman. No, it had started long before that, from the moment that they had been introduced, while she was still human. Baroness Zaradnik was an insidious tactician in more ways than one. Elishnish prided herself on being an excellent hunter, yet she had been slowly cornered like prey. Her realization of what was going on only happened about halfway, and even with that awareness, she could find no way to escape. If the noblewoman had been forceful in her methods, used threats, aggression and violence, resistance to her advances would have been a simple matter. It would have been equally simple to deny the Baroness if bribery, kindness and overflowing generosity had been employed. Elishnish could not flee, so she braced herself for a long, painful fight in a confusing and complicated reality that her poor frost dragon self struggled to keep up with. Instead, nothing of the sort happened. Lady Zaradnik simply was. Elishnish was provided with a comfortable home because she needed one. Anxiety was answered not with reassurance, but unshakable certainty. What would happen was what would happen. The Baroness did not coddle her subjects, she armed them with the weapons required to fight their own respective battles. At the same time, she was a warden. This was more than a simple title, it represented a concept that differed from species to species. To those who dwelled in natural settings, like the Chronos, a warden was one who maintained the balance of nature and ensured that it thrived. In civilized nations, they upheld the order of society, keeping threats to that order contained or at bay. A keeper of balance. A keeper of order. A force of nature and a force of will. An icon of stability, a place of sanctuary in a world that teetered on the precipice of unprecedented change. The Chronos had immediately recognized the significance of her role, but their concerns revolved around the survival of their society. Other mortals sensed it in the ways allowed by their limited understanding. Elishnish mostly cared only for herself, and in her selfishness, she found that the Baroness had become an irresistible existence. She was a place of safety that Elishnish could always return to, like a reliable heir she could always rely on for reprieve. Over time, she came to understand that giving up her freedom to Ludmilla Zaradnik was the best way to ensure both her continued safety and freedom. At the same time, Ludmilla Zaradnik was ignorant and vulnerable in a myriad of ways that she still did not comprehend, which annoyed Elishnish to no end when she considered the undead warden's place in the grand scheme of things. Rather than becoming a pet, Elishnish felt like she had become some sort of minder. This assuaged her draconic sensibilities somewhat, and since Lady Zaradnik was open to what Elishnish had to share, a comfortable sort of equilibrium had settled between them. The outcome very much had the sense of being preordained. How much of this was planned by Lady Schultier? How much a product of intuition? Perhaps few aspects were the result of sheer happenstance, but Elishnish felt that something else was meddling in everything. Coincidences of this scale never happened. Not that she particularly minded such meddling. As she had mentioned to Lady Zaradnik, dragons were as much a personification of primal forces as they were people in the conventional sense that mortals understood. The greatest of dragonkind were the keepers of the world, and to be granted purpose by the world conveyed a sense of gratification and pride unmatched by any treasure or achievement. She also received tangible benefits from their relationship, of course. In addition to the authority conferred to her by her station, being both a pet and a loyal vassal meant that Elishnish was bestowed quite a number of perks. Not only had she gained slightly in power, but her competency improved by a small margin compared to the memories of her past performance. Her mental state was reinforced, which was a great boon for a frost dragon who was constantly surrounded by unfamiliar things. She was a bit dubious over the fact that she felt an increased sense of security when Lady Zaradnik was riding her around, but that might be a hint at further benefits to come. "Hello?" "Yes, what is it, Elishnish?" "Nothing, just seeing if it still works." The bond that they shared was convenient, as well. Elishnish had dropped Lady Zaradnik off at the construction camp in the Upper Reaches, which was roughly 140 kilometers from Irantal, but it still worked from that distance. Now, she could ask questions whenever she encountered something she wasn't sure of. Telepathy was unlike message spells, where one conveyed words to a recipient. It was the sharing of thoughts, of self, laying bare the small part of their minds that had connected. As such, it was far more effective than the conveyance of mere words, and it was impossible to lie. Even if one conveyed a lie, the intent, feelings and truth would all come along with it. "How do you feel about me, my lady?" "You are very precious to me." "What about Lady Shiltir?" "She is very important to me, as well." "And the Sorcerer King?" "Having 3 of his children every 50 years or so would be nice." "Stop that," Elishnish chortled to herself. Due to the legends rendered by the local bards and the everyday presence of frost dragons in Irantal, more than a few humans thought it might be nice to have a dragon as a pet or a mount. Little did they know what that entailed. Stopping midway through the aviary, she opened the icebound door to one of the new accommodations. "Dear brother, I've come to." Elishnish stopped halfway into Hegenmill's room, and her tail lashed over the icy floor of the corridor outside. Her brother was lying side by side with Calisiel, their heads nearly touching. Elishnish's claws tapped steadily over the stones. "You understand that we all share the same father, yes?" "Why, you're misunderstanding something, dear sister." Hegenmill shifted away from their half-sister. "I'm teaching Calisiel how to read, and these books are very small." Her gaze went from Hegenmill to Calisiel, who nodded emphatically. A book lay open between them, one of the ones about magic Hegenmill had requested that she purchase for him. Letters, words and symbols were etched all over the layer of ice caking the walls, making the room look like an abode of some insane individual. "Have you learned any magic, by the way?" "I have." Hegenmill drew himself up proudly. "Handling books and such has become much easier, now." "How so?" "Allow me to demonstrate." Her brother cleared his throat and pointed a claw at the book on the floor. "Mage hand." The book closed itself and slowly rose from the floor. At Hegenmill's direction, it went over and placed itself into a space in the nearby bookshelf. Her brother's wings shifted in a self-satisfied way. "No more trying to move these tiny books around with my claws," he said. "This will become even more useful as I age and grow larger." Elishnish couldn't deny that it was a useful spell to have, especially for Hegenmill, who lacked the means to alter his appearance. "Have you learned anything else?" she asked. That's the only one I have at the moment. I'm working on Read Magic next, which will allow me to decipher magical script on scrolls and such." "What tier of magic is that?" "Read Magic is a cantrip," Hegenmill replied, "just like Mage Hand. I figured that I would start with some easy spells first. Once I'm confident enough to do so, I'll have my agent shop around for comprehend languages. It's strangely rare here." "Does every spell that you plan on learning revolve around your hobby?" One of Elishnish's spell songs had the combined effect of read magic and comprehend languages. They wouldn't have gotten anywhere with the texts in Fioberkana if she hadn't figured the spell song out first. She and Hegenmill usually divided their tasks, so things like translation had been up to Elishnish while Hegenmill sifted through the materials that he could already read. Elishnish supposed that, in their current circumstances, she couldn't be around to translate everything. Mostly?" Hegenmill seemed to shrink back from her. "As you should well know, frost dragons aren't exactly prodigious innate casters. Since we work for the Sorceress Kingdom, there's no need to learn magic for combat, either." With that being the case, utility spells are the best option, yes? You're an adult as well. What have you been learning, sister? Elishnish suppressed a grimace. She hadn't learned anything at all. When it came to spell songs, she awed other bards with her superlative mastery. When it came to arcane magic, however, she could get nowhere. It was not for lack of trying, either. Cast that spell again, brother. Oh, okay? Elishnish opened her senses. Heginmil cast the spell, and the book from before came back out of the shelf, floating over to settle on the floor. She eyed it with a scowl. As usual, she couldn't get a feel for the magic. Where did you learn that from, anyway? Eurarius, that Naga mother entertains a few times a month. He has many spells that I'd like to eventually learn, and his tuition is very reasonable. The Naga was a reptilian being roughly 8 meters long, so it made sense that he had utility magic that would be of common interest with a dragon. By the way, Heginmil said, what have you come by for, sister? I thought we had run out of time to dig things up about the Empire. We have, Elishnish replied. I just came by to see you before I left. Come to think of it, you always did that in the past. There's no knock this time, though. I don't have to worry about you starving here. I will be in the Empire for 2 or 3 months, so is there anything that you need before I head off? Some souvenirs, I suppose? You did promise me that you'd bring some back once you started exploring beyond our home. It was perhaps the only promise that Elishnish had ever made before entering into Lady Zaradnik's service. Wrapped up in her excitement about the world beyond in her younger days, she had carelessly pledged to do so. Of course, dear brother, she said. Make sure you don't get yourself skinned by Lady Aura while I'm away. Speaking of which, how do you address her in private? Why? I'm just curious. Mistress should be the proper term, yes? I see. Well, I'm off, Calasil. If Heginmil tries anything funny, bite off his tail. Yes, dear sister. Wah. Elishnish closed the door behind her and went on her way. Her mother appeared to be on a delivery flight and Elishnish spared little thought for her other siblings, so she left the aviary. Before entering the stairs to the demi-human quarter, she assumed her human appearance. Mistress? Yes? Nothing. It did feel more appropriate, but Elishnish wasn't sure whether she liked it or not. Dawn had finally broken over Rerantle's eastern walls, and the denizens of the demi-human quarter were changing shifts, as the dwarves liked to call it. Nocturnal races retired to their homes or into the underground while diurnal ones appeared to take their place. Her gaze went to the entrance to the underground tunnels, a locale she had often frequented in the past few weeks as she accompanied Zushiru. The Quagoa merchant and his apprentices were probably resting at the imperial border. Elishnish was due to meet them in the next 2 hours or so, but there was one last place that she needed to visit. After following the lane that made a wide circuit around the central lake for a few dozen meters, Elishnish turned to enter the grounds of the Justice Dragon Dojo. Her steps slowed as she tested the air. Tswe's scent was weak enough that Elishnish felt confident she had left for work. Inside, Master Tian was meditating at the head of the hall, awaiting the arrival of his morning class. Elishnish brought her hands in front of her, inclining her head as she pressed a fist against her open palm. Good morning, Master Tian. The old human opened his eyes. He arose from his kneeling posture, his steely frame bending forward slightly as he returned her greeting. Shiver, he nodded. All prepared for your trip to the Empire? I'll be flying out soon, Elishnish replied. I came by to pay my respects before leaving. Master Tian smiled slightly in response. Does something amuse you, Master Tian? Elishnish asked. You have grown considerably, Master Tian answered. Enough to be mistaken for a different person than you were half a year ago. I have much to thank you for, Master Tian, she said. Though most of these changes are only on the surface. Half a year is not a very long time for someone like me, and I am quite satisfied with my nature. So I have learned. Perhaps it was a lesson for me, as well. Many of His Majesty's subjects are much the same in this regard. One nation united under the will of a supreme sovereign, yet each subject is free to answer their respective callings. My meager imagination cannot fathom even the closest reaches of the Sorcerer King's awesome benevolence and wisdom. It occurred to Elishnish that she had never met or even seen the Sorcerer King. Heginmil mentioned that he was something like a powerful elder lich and many appeared to regard him highly. The only thing her frost dragon imagination could construct out of this information, however, was an elder lich that was shinier than other elder liches. Could elder liches have bones made out of platinum? She assumed that he was at least not made out of stone like the statues outside the city. "Have you had any luck finding another dancer?" Ilishnish asked. "Not yet," Master Tian answered. "There are many bards available, but they are performers for hire. The dancers performing in the city are similarly disinterested in employing their craft for martial purposes. I suppose it can't be helped, considering that they are humans." When it came to martial training, a bard was invaluable as their songs of healing accelerated recuperation. The alternative would be employing divine casters with limited mana or using alchemical alternatives, which would become prohibitively expensive. With Ilishnish's success as a dancer, Master Tian was now looking to repeat that success and have one or two for every class. This, in turn, would expand the scope and quality of his dojo's training. What about demi-humans and heteromorphs? I'm honestly at a loss when it comes to that. As far as I know, all of the bards that might qualify to become dancers live outside of the city in their respective communities. My hopes were pinned on the Quagoa in the city since they are natural monks and might be able to smoothly pick up dancer classes as a result, but the Quagoa do not have bards for some reason. The Quagoa do not have any magic casters, Ilishnish said, but I'm pretty sure that they have bards. I heard that they were subjected to some calamity in the spring, so the clan here may have lost all of theirs. As a bard, Ilishnish felt that this was a shame. Tribal cultures like the Quagoa were reliant on oral traditions to pass on their lore, and bards were instrumental in maintaining them. If the Quagoa no longer had any bards, they would be hard-pressed to retain their history and culture. With this being the case, Ilishnish said, I suggest that you ask around for a Quagoa who is working to collect and preserve their lore. The Quagoa are a very social race, and matters of culture are important to such races. They will not so easily give up their collective identity. Once you figure that out, you have likely identified a Quagoa who is on the path to becoming a bard. With an offer of support, you may be able to entice them to train and become a dancer. I see. Master Tian stroked his beard thoughtfully. This had not occurred to me. I should look into it as soon as possible. You should be on your way soon, but before you leave, I have something for you. The old human reached into his uwagi and produced a long strip of sparkling material. Ilishnish's nose twitched. It was an item that smelled about as valuable as the equipment that Lady Zaradnik wore. A gift, Master Tian said. You've been a great help these past months, and I am proud of how far you have come as my first pupil. Furthermore, you are embarking on an important task for the Sorceress Kingdom. This piece of equipment should be of great use to you. What is it? Her draconic senses could pinpoint its material value, but without using the appropriate spell song, she could not identify the properties of the item. A belt of magnificence, he told her. It doesn't have any special abilities that you can activate, but it does provide a modest boost to all of your attributes. As you are a bard whose talents do not only involve combat, I thought to offer you something that could be of use in any situation. Ilishnish took the gift from Master Tian's hand, raising it in front of her. It was woven out of some sort of silvery metal that shimmered with even the smallest trace of light. Hopefully, she could do something about that. Will this work on me? I don't see why not, Master Tian replied. The only restriction that I know of for dragons is body armor. Power infused her as she finished equipping the belt. The magic item adjusted to her body, becoming a slanted band that hung off of her right hip. She moved around experimentally, finding that it did not impede her movements in any way. This might look a bit strange as a dragon, she muttered. Frost dragons are quite slim, so it shouldn't stand out too much. Thank you for the gift, Master Tian. Ilishnish lowered her head. Everyone else seems to only ask things of me when it comes to this trip to the Empire. Consider it a token of their esteem, Master Tian told her. To be entrusted with duty is the greatest honor. Master Shiru, where does this one go? Zushiru looked up from his clipboard. His apprentices were milling about, moving crates from one wagon to another. That one goes there, Zushiru said. No, not there, there. The apprentice milled about in confusion until a second apprentice came to help him. Then they milled about in confusion together. Eventually, the crate found its place in a nearby wagon alongside several other crates marked with similar labels. The new wagon's driver, A teamster from one of Lady Wagner's merchant companies silently shook his head. Unlike the wagons used inside of the Sorceress Kingdom, those that headed to foreign lands did not employ soletas. Thus, they required staff to handle the horses for their trip. The wagons used outside of the Sorceress Kingdom were different as well. There was no need for the advanced models that were designed to harness the capabilities of soletas. 4 of Zushiru's apprentices would be coming on the trip with him while the rest stayed behind to continue operations in Nirantal. He had secured the same amulet that allowed day-blind beings to see in bright light for them. They would be paying him back through their labors, of course. His goods were carefully selected and represented the culmination of his efforts in and around Nirantal, but most of the space on the wagons nearby were not meant for his goods at all. Before heading out of the city, the wagons had stopped at one of the warehouses owned by House Wagner to be loaded with grain. Zushiru was just one of several merchants in the caravan, and he would only pay for his portion of the cargo capacity being used until the grain was unloaded and they went their separate ways. When all was readied, Zushiru and his apprentices clambered onto the wagon. The teamster stared at them. "What are you doing?" he asked. "We go, yes?" Zushiru answered. "I meant, why are you all piling into the wagon?" Zushiru rubbed his nose in confusion. "Because we are going to the next place," he said. "We have always done this." "This here's a full wagon and we don't got a solita," the teamster told them. "Everyone but me and you are walking. But the others will be left behind." "Again, we don't have a solita," the teamster's gaze passed over the quivering apprentices. "We're only going about 30 kilometers in a day. That's 3 kilometers an hour. You can walk that fast, yeah?" The apprentices looked at Zushiru. He sighed and hopped out of his seat and onto the road. "Come," he said. "We will walk together." The other Quagga hopped off and gathered around him. The driver clicked his tongue to ease the wagon forward. Zushiru and his apprentices followed alongside. "Master Shiru," one of his apprentices asked, "why must we use these strange animals? It does not look very reliable and requires a human besides. A solita is much better." "The clans of the Empire are not brave like the clans of the Sorceress Kingdom," Zushiru told him. "If we bring a solita with us, they will run away and hide. How will we sell anything if they do this?" "Zushiru," another apprentice asked, "where is your beautiful wife?" "She said that she will meet us at the place where the caravans gather." The wagon rolled out onto the highway, turning east. As the human had mentioned, they did not go very fast. The 5 Quagga waddled alongside, staring out at the wide valley that stretched far to the south. Some distance beyond them, the land became shrouded in mist. Zushiru brought out his map, which he had learned how to make sense of during their journeys throughout the Sorcerer's Kingdom. The misty land was a place called the Katza Plains, but there appeared to be nothing there for merchants. His eyes wandered elsewhere, tracing the line of the highway to their destination. He frowned as a sudden realization came upon him. Driver, this map becomes strange on the side." "What do you mean?" "It claims that this next city is far away at the edge of the world." "The hell are you talking about?" One thing that Zushiru had swiftly learned was that many people who worked under merchants were coarse and rude when not dealing with customers. Some merchants were like that as well. He hoped that his apprentices would not become like that. Zushiru raised the map towards the human. He looked down at it with a frown. "This is a map of the Sorceress Kingdom," the teamster said. "It only shows the area around Nirantal. Don't you have a map of the Empire?" Now that the human mentioned it, Zushiru realized that he did. He looked around in his satchel before finding a second, larger map that had been provided to him by Lady Wagner. He unfolded it and his frown grew. He told one of his apprentices. "Hold this up." The apprentice held up the map of the Empire between his claws. Zushiru walked around him with the map of the Sorceress Kingdom, trying to figure out where it fit. When he finally did, his fur smoothed down and his whiskers drooped. The apprentice holding the map did not miss his expression of dismay. "Master Shiru," he asked, "what is wrong?" "Driver," Zushiru asked, "which part of this map is the Baharuth Empire?" The human leaned over to look at the map stretched out below him. "All of it," he answered. "Except for the parts around the edges." "What?" Zushiru squeaked. This is not right. How far are we to this first city?" "Depends on the weather," the driver replied, straightening again. Unless we get caught in the rain for days, it should be no more than a week. Zushiru took the map back into his trembling claws. The empire was huge beyond his imaginings. Many thousands of clans could dwell within. The kingdom of the dwarves was as a worn-down pebble beside it. How could anyone withstand such a mighty nation? He would have to be careful, lest he bring ruin upon the sorceress kingdom. Master Shiru, one of his apprentices asked, did he just say that we would be walking for a week? To the first city, in total, we will be walking for 3 months. 3 months. Master, our feet will fall off. We will shrivel up on the roads during the day and freeze at night. The realms above are an evil place. This is a joke, yes, Master? No nation can be so large. They would have conquered the entire world if so. As the plaintive voices rose around him, Zushiru felt around for his flask. It was a magic item that Lady Wagner said would be essential for their journey. Aside from this, he had another satchel that contained preserved meats. The warm mantle that the dragon had bought for him was draped over his shoulders. He drew its hood over his head to shield himself from the rising sun, and his apprentices followed suit with their own. Their whiskered snouts all poked out from the shadows of their cowls. They would need masks to keep their noses from drying out. They arrived at the imperial border late in the afternoon. There, they found golems, death knights, and skeletal laborers working with dozens of humans. The land was being leveled and packed down, and stockpiles of construction materials were gathered in the fields around them. In the distance, to the southwest and northwest, stood 2 dilapidated towers. What is going on here? Zushiru asked. This is the new border town Lady Wagner is raising, the driver answered. Just like the one on the theocracy border. Used to just be a stopping spot for caravans. We are stopping here? Yep. Caravans travel from early morning to late afternoon. We set up and break camp during the remaining hours of daylight. There are towns or at least villages for us to stop at along all the highways spaced a good day's travel from one another. Zushiru nodded at the familiar description. The towns and villages in the Sorceress Kingdom were laid out in much the same way, but he did not understand why that was until now. Wagons drawn by soul eaters could travel further in an hour than this merchant caravan would in a day. They would be spending as much time on the roads as in the cities and towns of the empire. What if we do not have a good day's travel? Depends, the teamster replied. The imperial highways are all paved, but those highways are nothing compared to the ones being constructed in the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Still, it's easier to get around the empire than Riastais. Bad weather will slow us down. Heavy rain means that we stay where we are. Most caravans won't move unless they're sure that their goods will stay safe and dry. Not being able to make it to the next stop means you're camping out in the wild, which comes with its own risks. This made sense. Humans were not as social as Quagua, but they still understood that there was safety in numbers. Being caught alone made one a more likely mark for predators. The native lands of the Quagua tribes under the Azalizia Mountains had monsters that melded into shadow and beasts that swam through stone, but Zushiru did not know what things might try to eat him in the realms above. The Sorceress Kingdom was kept safe by powerful undead. Not even the trees would dare attack them as they went from place to place, but the same could not be said for the Empire. What risks are there if we experience delays and must sleep beneath this sky? Zushiru asked. Our caravans aren't the newest frames from House Wagner, the human answered, but they're still rune-crafted. We won't have to worry about broken axles and such. Weather's the main problem. It rains quite a bit in the winter, and the northeast and northwest parts of the Empire can sometimes have snow coming down from the mountains. As for everything else, the Imperial legions keep the most common threats at bay. Any risks on that front would be from roaming monsters and highwaymen. What is a highwayman? A sort of brigand, basically. The Empire will root out bandit dens and monster lairs, but some bandits and monsters don't have bases or homes to target. That makes them hard to deal with even when there are regular patrols. A man about as strong as a gold-ranked adventurer can easily take down an undefended merchant wagon or a small group of regular travelers. Groups of highwaymen will pose as travelers themselves and blend in with the traffic to find likely marks. When the time is ripe, they'll strike. They can't afford to allow a report to get out to the authorities, so they'll leave their victims dead in a forest or ditch. The Quagua collectively swallowed. Being in a forest was bad enough. Being dead in a forest was unimaginably terrifying. The wagon rolled off of the highway, heading over to a field where dozens of other wagons were arranged in circles around their respective campfires. Zushiru's nervousness bled away at the sight of many people. The odors of human food and wood smoke drifted in the air. There were enough wagons present that it looked like a village had been raised on the field. Unlike a village, however, most of the humans present were male. How come there are so few females? There's usually fewer than you see here, the teamster said. The only reason why we have so many with us here is because they're helping to market the new rune-crafted wagons to prospective clients. Otherwise, well, traveling comes with many dangers, and the average man is stronger than the average woman. Humans had many inconveniences. Quagga females were just as good as Quagga males in a fight, so such considerations were unnecessary unless a female was pregnant. Upon joining a new ring of wagons that was forming for the night, the teamster indicated their nearby resting spot before seeing to his horses. Zushiru walked over, scratching his chest in thought as he watched what the other merchants were doing. The humans returned his curious gaze, eyeing Zushiru and his apprentices in their cowls and mantles. What he saw within the ring of wagons was concerning. Bedrolls were laid by their respective vehicles while the caravan workers saw to one thing or another. Nothing like the human dwellings in the city could be seen. The Quagga shivered at the sight. "Master," one apprentice asked, "are we to lay exposed in the cold night?" "Master," another apprentice asked, "shall we make a burrow?" "What? No." They all jumped at the sound of the teamster's voice. "You're not digging any holes in the camp," the human male said. "That's nothing but broken legs and damaged merchandise." Zushiru looked around again. He pointed to something in the distance. "Are we allowed to raise a tent like that one?" he asked. The teamster looked over. "If you have one," he said. "Why doesn't everyone have a tent?" "Because personal comforts take up cargo space." Zushiru nodded slowly in understanding. If there was something that traveling merchants and their staff understood, it was the cost of transportation and how it affected their profits. Even the warm and gentle Lady Gonye was very strict when it came to such things. Fortunately for Zushiru, he had decided his stand with its tent was essential for conducting business. He instructed his apprentices to set up the tent before it became any colder. Rumor had it that, in the coldest of winters on the surface, it could sometimes become so bitterly cold that a thin layer of frost formed overnight. Many things would die, and howling winds would scour the blackened fields. It was not something that Zushiru wished to experience. Hungry frost dragons and frost giants would surely come after that. The tent came up 15 minutes later and the Quagga all scuttled in. An apprentice tied the opening shut while another stood on a stool to hang a metal loop on a hook overhead. Everyone sighed in relief after the magic item was activated, filling the interior with warmth. They settled down and nibbled on their evening portions. "Master Shiru, will we be doing this every night?" "When we travel between towns and cities, I think," Zushiru replied. "Maybe some places will have some nice caves." It was a new experience for them. When they were trading in the Sorceress Kingdom, the Soul Eaters were fast enough to cover the distance between towns in about an hour, not counting the time it took to enter and leave. "What do we do now, Master Shiru?" The human said. "We will be leaving early in the morning, so we sleep." And so they lay down around the floor of the tent. Sleep came quickly for Zushiru, for the warm and enclosed space reminded him of the cozy Quagga warrens below Erantal. "Shiru." A familiar female's voice stirred him from his slumber. Something shook his shoulder. "Zushiru. Zuhei. Where are you sticking your claws? If you do that to any human females, the authorities are going to lock you away." Cold air blew in from the outside. Zushiru shivered and squinted at the silhouette of a humanoid female leaning over him. "Wife?" he murmured. "Don't wife me. We're leaving in 30 minutes. The Empire awaits."